Hi everyone. We're now going to be talking about how to draw rectangles in the center of the page. Now, the first thing that the reason you might want to do this is because you want to draw a background over the entire screen, but you want there to be some sort of margin around the background. So for instance, let's look at what this code does. So I'm going to take this and we run it. Okay, so it draws two rectangles. The first one is this green rectangle on line 6. And notice how there's this thin white margin around it, but it's in the center. The next one we draw is this orange one, which is in the center, and it has a certain width and height, and it's in there. So let's look at the first way that we draw something. So let's get rid of this for now. Basically drawing something that covers most of the screen but with a margin. Now the way that this is done is we specify our margin, and essentially, let's look at this picture. We have this entire canvas, and what we want to do is draw something which has a margin of, let's say, 10. So basically, we have a point at the top left, which is 10 away from the top and 10 away from the side. And then we have a point at the bottom right, which is 10 away from the bottom and 10 away from the right. Now what we need to do is basically figure out what the 2 points are to make this rectangle. Now the way that we get this point is easy. It's just 10 to the left, which is 10, and then it's the margin down, which is margin. Remember, up is down, so if I want to go down 10, I have to go positive 10. So that's this point. Now to get this point, it's a little bit more tricky. So really what I'm doing is starting at the maximum width of the page and going minus the margin. So it's width minus margin. And then here I'm starting at the height of the page and going down, or rather subtracting the margin to go up. Because remember, up is down, so when I subtract from the height, I go up. So if we look at the code, the x1, y1 is margin, because that's 10 away and 10 down. Then the x2, y2 is width minus margin and height minus margin. So when we draw this, we basically get a rectangle which is 10 by 10 away from the width. Now if I made this margin 30, let's say 30, it'll be the same thing, but notice how now it's more enclosed because it starts farther away from the sides. So that's one way that we can draw a centered rectangle. Now another way is approach number 2. So approach number 2, as if we can take a quick look again, is basically starting in the center. So the first thing that's interesting here is that we calculate cx cy is equal to width divided by 2, height divided by 2. So that's how we get the center of the page, right? We find the middle of the x directions and the middle in the y direction. So that's cx cy. Then essentially what we need to do is calculate what we want the width and the height of the rectangle to be. So in this situation, we're going to say that the width of the rectangle is the width of the page divided by 4, and the height of the rectangle is the height of the page divided by 4. So this essentially is going to create a rectangle which is 25% in the x and 25% of the page in the y direction. Now the way that we actually draw the rectangle is as follows. So let me get rid of all of this stuff. So once again, we have this canvas. Now what we're going to do is essentially start in the middle. So this is our center, let's say. And what we need to do is calculate 2 points. Because in the end, we want the width to be, let's say we want the width to be 100. So we want this to be the width, but we want it to be centered. So that means that there needs to be 50 on this side and 50 on that side. So really, this should be the divide, where it's equal parts on this side and equal parts on that side. Same thing in the up and down direction. Let's say I want the height to be 100 or 50. So in this way, I want it to be 25 on top and 25 below. So now, if we look at what this entire thing should look like, let's say that this was a perfect rectangle. That means that essentially if the width is, let's say, W, then this is the CX, minus, so I start at cx and I go backwards by w over 2. W over 2. So that's how I go backwards to get the x-coordinate of this point. To go forwards and get the x-coordinate of this point, I'm essentially starting at cx again, and then I add width over 2. Sorry for the bad handwriting. So basically, I go backwards to get the x, so I subtract by width over 2, and to go forwards, I add width over 2. Similar things in the y direction. To get the y coordinates at this point, I'll start at cy and subtract the height divided by 2. To get this y, I'll start at cy and add the height over 2. So if we look at the code, we have our cx, cy. We say x1 is equal to cx minus the width over 2. Then cy is, or the y1 is cy minus the height over 2. Remember, this is the height and the width of the rectangle. The x2 is cx plus the width of the rectangle divided by 2. And the y2 is cy plus the width, the height over 2. So in this way, we basically start at the center and move away to get a centered rectangle, because we go equal parts away in both directions. So if I draw this, I'll get a rectangle in the middle, just as we expected.